Today we look at two ridiculous things going on in the world. 10 years ago, you would think I was joking. Welcome to Culture Shift, the Barry Farah Show. We are living in an American culture that has shifted from tolerant to cancel culture, from decent to rude, from optimistic to cynical, and from relatively safe to increasingly violent. But it's not too late. I hope to equip you with a historical framework applied to current events so you can lead and get America back on track for good. Welcome back to the Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. And boy, has culture shifted. We care about your success, and that really does depend on your freedom. And your freedom depends on an infrastructure of what's good. And despite what you hear in the news, that's based on a Judeo-Christian worldview. Today we'll have some fun looking at two ridiculous things. You may have heard about them in passing, but we'll go to the source and see why they are so ridiculous. First, the Oregon Department of Education has introduced a new math curriculum, and that might not sound ridiculous up front, but the new math curriculum includes how to dismantle racism in mathematics instruction. No kidding. The course informs math teachers on the numerous ways that white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms. I couldn't believe it until I read it for myself. And so, hey, let's look at a few of these things that they say in this curriculum. I mean, truthfully, I thought it was a joke, but here it is. The title is A Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction. Dismantling Racism in Mathematics Instruction. This tool helps teachers examine their actions, beliefs, and values around teaching mathematics. This framework for deconstructing racism in mathematics offers essential characteristics of anti-racist math educators and critical approaches to dismantling white supremacy in math classrooms by making clear the toxic characteristics of white supremacy culture with respect to math. Building on the framework, teachers engage with critical practice in order to shift their instructional beliefs toward anti-racist math education, and then by centering on anti-racism, we model how to be anti-racist math educators. This class advocates for a collective approach to dismantling white supremacy, and administrators should examine these programs and these policies and how white supremacy impacts student outcomes. In addition, they should hold teachers accountable for completing these activities. And man, there are a lot of activities and techniques in the workbook. Some might even call it brainwashing. So if you're confused at how white supremacy culture manifests itself in the math classroom, all you have to do is read on and you'll find exactly what they mean. According to this training, white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when the focus is on getting the right answer. Yes, this is a classic example of either-or thinking. This is a merit-based system. And according to the folks who wrote this workbook, merit-based incentives are bad. Students are graded. In other words, the grading doesn't allow room for the student to be his own boss. It reinforces the dangers of paternalism. Yes, that's what they said, suggesting that parents and teachers know what's good for the developing child. And it encourages power hoarding. What's power hoarding? That's where the teacher and other adults know what the right answer is. So basically, white supremacy is when adults have authority over kids. Really? I thought all parents assume that role with their kids. But no, this is a white supremacy issue. And it shows up in math classrooms when expectations are not met. In other words, when you say 2 plus 2 is 5 as a student, and the teacher says, no, that's the wrong answer, that's an old way of thinking. That's white supremacy because it drives students to learn what is right. Now you might ask, what's wrong with knowing what's right? Well, the next section in the workbook further explains it. Procedural fluency is preferred over conceptual knowledge. After all, conceptual knowledge reinforces objectivity. This is a quote. By requiring linear processing. In other words, the idea that there is one right answer in math, in other words, that 2 plus 2 actually just equals 4, that conveys that there's an objective truth, and that's a bad thing. White supremacy is the idea that language acquisition is equated with mathematical proficiency. This reinforces quantity over quality when teachers reduce math teaching to things that are more easily measurable, like literal math. As a math minor, I kind of think that's ridiculous. Understanding how to chart, table, sort, and categorize things is actually really helpful. And language proficiency in math is good, not bad. Math is literal by definition. But white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when math is taught in a linear fashion and skills are taught sequentially. The complaint here is that this is a forced construct of linear teaching and it reinforces objectivity. And remember, objectivity is bad. But actually, the reality is math builds on itself. There's a bunch of other ways to teach it, but at the end of the day, math is sequential. I mean, the structural engineer lays out a foundation, and he does that based on sequential math properly. And if he doesn't lay it out properly, that foundation will not hold. The next thing that is white supremacy evidence in math teaching is that real-world math has been valued over math in the real world. What do they mean by this? Well, they explain it. Often the emphasis is placed on learning math in the real world as if our classrooms are not part of the real world. Well, actually, your classroom isn't really the real world. It's a classroom. They go on to say that this reinforces notions of either or thinking because math is only seen as useful when you get it right or not. However, according to them, this can result in using mathematics to uphold capitalist and imperialistic ways of being. So these folks who are Marxists, apparently, who hate math, must have been hurt by math, think that capitalism is bad and think that linear algebra, which is used by engineers all over the world, is imperialistic. So white supremacy culture shows up in math classrooms when the focus is only on getting the right answer. The concept of mathematics being purely objective, according to them, and their quote, is unequivocally false. No, it's actually unequivocally true. Upholding the idea that there are always right and wrong answers perpetuates objectivity. They really say this. I mean, isn't objective truth the point when you're building an airplane? I mean, look, do you want to get into an airplane that's been maintained by somebody who doesn't test the strength of the wing in an objective way with objective tools? Look, I'm all for productive alternative ways of teaching math. The Singapore method has great results. It was originally developed by Singapore's Ministry of Education for Singapore public schools. That method's been widely adopted in various forms all over the world. Singapore math consistently ranks at the top of international testing. It's a nice progression of concepts. It's got a great approach to a deeper understanding of math. It helps in science as well. The Singapore math method is better for a whole bunch of people than the Western way. It focuses on achieving a sense of mastery through intentional sequencing of concepts. And instead of just pushing people through a more rote approach that I learned, students learn to think mathematically and rely on the depth of knowledge gained in their previous lessons. My daughter would have done much better in this type of a method. Maybe my son and my wife too. Singapore math helps make the whole idea of math more approachable for a whole bunch of people. It does help students perform at a higher level when their potential for understanding success is assumed. So how is this different from the way math is widely taught in the United States? Well, in the typical U.S. math program, students get this worked example, then they solve that problem. And they do that with a whole bunch of different numbers with that same kind of example, kind of building sort of a muscle memory, and then they move on to the next idea or concept. Well, in the Singapore math method, students have to think through the concept and then apply them in new ways. They can't just rely on simple replication or memory. Many believe it really helps students achieve a greater engagement and a broader thinking. In the U.S. math program, a concept or a skill is more compartmentalized, and that's true, and it's across grade levels. In the Singapore math approach, there's this strong sense of connectivity to the past, and that's kind of woven throughout. But Singapore math doesn't reach for any sense of victimhood to make someone feel better about not knowing the right answer. It is a legitimate alternative to learning the objective truth and getting to the right answer, but they don't confuse the topic by creating a connection between teaching math to anti-racist theory. I mean, why don't we just add Singapore math as an option to the math curriculum? Well, the quick, easy answer to that is it's difficult for a student that moves around to do Singapore math because you really kind of have to be in a similar setting. Singapore math doesn't reteach concepts or skills, and it's not as compartmentalized as the U.S. math, and it doesn't focus as much on applied math. So like data analysis and real-life examples are not as common in Singapore math as they are in the U.S. or Western math. And it requires a lot of teacher training to go from the U.S. math approach to the Singapore math. So, like everything, there are pros and cons. Why not just be open about that? And if we really want to help our children, just invest in making Singapore math a real alternative at most schools. That makes a lot of sense to me. And even though I've got a math minor in undergrad school and an MBA in finance in grad school, a lot of math in my life, and I've learned it in the traditional U.S. method, I see Singapore math as a legit alternative, especially if you can mitigate some of the cons. But we are not doing our kids any favors by teaching them how to be victimized when it comes to math. I mean, regardless of how you learned your math, you still need to apply it in the real world. But now the Oregon Math Guide explicitly says the classroom is the real world, that the classroom is not the real world. I'm sorry. In the real world, we use real math to ensure that the structure of a building is secure. In the real world, we design an underground tunnel that does not collapse. In the real world, we build a bridge that handles the weight of the traffic. In the real world, we manufacture windows that do not shatter in high wind. And in the real world, we run water lines that don't get contaminated with sewer. All right, that's math. That's one of the ridiculous items. Are you ready for the next ridiculous item? I'm ready. A private K-12 Episcopalian school in Manhattan is encouraging its students to stop using the terms mom, dad, and parents. I am not kidding. This is happening. Those affectionate terms must go. Again, I wouldn't believe it if I didn't read it, but sure enough, here it is, right now. This is happening. It's amazing how many instructions on how to think they can cram into these 12 pages, but it clears everything up if you have any confusion. The school says they've got to do more than just ban hateful language. They've got to use language that creates a welcoming and inclusive environment by using gender-inclusive language. So how do you pull this off? Well, you take gender out altogether, they say. No more boys and girls, just people and readers and characters. We go, what? No, so how do you describe things? Well, there's no more boy that's chasing a girl. Now, you can't say that. You now can say, child from the English class chases the character in the pink dress. They provide a very helpful gender table for those of you who might be a little confused. We learn here that you shall not say sweetheart, honey, or other affectionate terms. You can say the child's name, even if it's a male kind of a name. It's pushing it. They prefer all the names to be just gender neutral. And you can refer, and I'm not making this up, you can refer to the child friend in the blue shirt. But if you're a student, you shall not refer to the boy or girl based on stereotypes, such as length of hair, clothing, or appearance. You can't say, hey, that's a beautiful hair design for you as a young girl. No, you can't do that. You can respectfully ask how they identify, though. They give specific guidance on the new normal they are attempting to create. The whole concept of cisgender, that's the belief that if you were born a boy, you are in fact a boy. I mean, if you're born a girl, you are in fact a girl. Even though over 95% of the population believe that about themselves, that's not normative. No, this Episcopal school states that the traditional idea of believing you are what you were born is not the norm or the standard at all. Everyone chooses. You don't just naturally want to blow things up if you're a boy. You don't want to naturally nurture the doll if you're a girl. Those are very dangerous stereotypes. You can choose to do that, but it's not normal. It's not the standard. Again, there's a very helpful guide to kids, teachers, and parents. First, you must remove these harmful assumptions. For more clarity, you move to the next table, which deals with families. Rather than celebrate the traditional family, they discourage it. Mom and dad should be removed. And you can call your mom and dad grown-ups and folks. Folks? I mean, I thought that was old school boomer terminology. Regardless, parents should be dropped. That projects way too much of a sense of belonging, and it's not sensitive to the other students who may not have traditional parents. So what do you call your parents? Well, you can say guardian. Hello, guardian. You can't come home and say, hi, mom. No, it's guardian. Yes, and even your nanny must go. That's way too gender oriented, and that should be replaced with caregiver. The offensive use of husband or wife has to be swapped out entirely. Yes, husband and wife. It assumes that there's a sense of commitment, and it assumes that a sense of commitment is a good thing. And it assumes that a husband and a wife actually became husband and wife partly to have kids and to have a nuclear family. So, what should we replace husband and wife with? Well, there's a much less offensive partner. So, when you're talking about your mom and dad and you're referring to your mom and dad as husband and wife, or, you just have to say partner. You can use spouse. Why is there so much fuss against these traditional descriptors? Well, they say, we actively try to undo notions of a typical or normal family structure. It's right there. They also have a whole section on sexual orientation. The primary instruction here is to not say marriage is between a boy and a girl. It's not between a man and a woman. And they cover race. Don't say diverse. Just say person of color. Don't ask people where they're from. It is okay to ask what their cultural background is, though, but don't ever ask what race are you. Or as a kid, you can't ask another kid about where they came from, but you can say, how do you self-identify? And remember that if anyone ever says they faced discrimination because of their race, They are wrong. You're to help correct them. They faced discrimination because of a system of oppression. It wasn't just one isolated movement of racism. It wasn't just one racial person. It was due to a generation, a nation of implicit bias, of institutional racism, of intersectionality. That's the combination of racism, sexism, and classism, of microaggression. That's where you use subtle cues to insult marginalized people. And of course, white privilege. Never mind that some white people, such as our family, had economically very humble beginnings, and there were many people of color in our home growing up. Never mind that I attended a high school that was 50% black and 50% white. We were under the mistaken understanding, the namesake of the high school, Booker T. Washington, had the mistaken understanding that everyone should just be treated equally. We also got along very well. All right, now we're up to page 7 of this report. Though this was founded as a Christian school, no worries here if you were offended by Christian holidays. This section explicitly instructs you to never ask someone what religion you are, and never ask someone what they got for Christmas, or even whether or not they celebrated the holiday at all. You can say, I hope you had a great break. Well, I say phooey. Easter's coming up soon, and I hope you enjoy celebrating the resurrection of Jesus Christ. I also hope you enjoyed celebrating Valentine's last month with your sweetheart. If you're a married man, regardless of color of skin or cultural heritage, see how politically correct I am? I hope you kiss your darling wife and tell her how much you love her and how much you admire her fear of the Lord. I hope you tell her that she's a beautiful woman, and I hope you tell her she has really cute legs. I hope you celebrate her as a woman. If you're a woman, I hope you hug your husband, in a really special way. You know what I mean. And you tell him how much you respect his manliness. I hope you celebrate him as a man. If you have kids, I hope you nurture them according to their God-ordained creation. I hope you cuddle with your daughter and celebrate that she's a girl. I hope you cuddle with your young son and celebrate that he's a boy. Genesis 1:27 makes it clear. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. To your freedom, to celebrate God's most precious creation, you. God bless you.
Hi, I'm David Farah. Thank you for listening to my dad's podcast, The Barry Farah Show, Culture Shift. Click subscribe now to be sure you don't miss an episode. Share this podcast with your friends on social media and give The Barry Farah Show your 5-star rating. Check out today's show notes below this episode and at thebarryfarahshow.com. This podcast is also available in video format at The Barry Farah Show on YouTube. See you next time.